Everybody thought it was impossible, but here I am, 186 hours later, finally solo queuing all the way from level 1 all the way to diamond while only playing light. The worst class in the game. Yeah, I feel great. Why are you asking? I learned a lot doing this. I kind of had to, seeing as light by far is, again, the worst class I've ever played in a ranked or competitive setting. So I want to share the lessons that I had to pick up to go from this to this. So let's dive into it. The first and most obvious thing that I just have to get out of the way is that light is really bad. And you need to let that bleed into every decision that you make. Never take a fight head on, always try to catch your enemies mid-sprint as they're shooting someone else, or if they're going for a steal or a reviver, if they're just distracted. You only have 150 health and your guns have the same damage per second as anyone else's. You're gonna lose that trade. If you for some reason don't, most of the time your pick will get revived and you will have to spend the next 30 seconds desperately trying to get away with a sliver of health and probably lacking some, if not all, of the utility you burned on that first kill in the first place. So play like you have 1 health, and the second you start getting focused, change up the angle. In some very frustrating cases, enemies know that you're playing angles and will start to straight up hunting you, in which case you should focus on staying alive, all while forcing the enemies into continuing to chase you. If they do mess up positioning wise, you can still score a kill or two as you're chasing, but most of the time you have to hope that your teammates will do something with the space that you give them. In the same vein, after playing as light this much, I started to notice that a lot of lights are really overextended, and as I am playing other classes, I've started forcing these free 1v1s all by myself. Another big issue with playing light is that just by you picking light, the team morale will already start off really bad. I've had countless teammates that see that I'm playing light and then all of a sudden they're swapping from medium or heavy to light themselves, oftentimes with some troll loadout just so they can go 0 and 8. The easiest way to convince the enemies that you are worth trusting is to have some sweaty skins equipped. I'm not kidding. If you have a sweaty looking name, maybe even with a TTV in it, plus some expensive or rare or just cool looking skins, you will be taken a lot more seriously. Just keep in mind that this is a double-edged sword, as it also leads to enemies paying extra attention to you as well. A safe way to improve the chance of good morale is starting the game with a quick mic check. Join and leave the voice chat and then join it again if nobody responds, just to get their attention, and then give your teammates a friendly hello. Odds are they're going to be a lot more cooperative.
Yo, what's up guys? You ready to win this?
Fucking serious? We get another fucking light on our goddamn team? Get the fuck out of here, losers. Switch to something fucking useful for once.
Solo queuing as a light also taught me the depressing, what I call the 9-1 rule. In most competitive games, there is a 3-3-3 rule where a third of your games are unwinnable, a third of your games are basically guaranteed wins unless you really throw them, and the last third or so can be impacted by your skill alone. But due to how weak light is, due to cheaters, your teammates, due to how the game matches solos versus stacks, that percentage instead looks like 9 out of 10 games will be guaranteed losses, or at the very least not tournament wins. And the last one game will be up to you whether you can win it or not. If you're in a pre-made stacks, the odds will look a lot better, but as a solo queuer, my heart goes out for you. I recommend anyone who plays the finals to play in a full stack, which is why I have a Discord server with an LFG channel to find like-minded gamers. You can join us by dropping into discord.gg/Ottr. But let's continue with some more important things that you really should know about, like loadouts. I found that if you play light the right way, that being an annoying mosquito that only strikes when the enemy isn't looking at you, then there doesn't have to be such a thing as a bad loadout. Technically, almost every loadout is equally viable. They might just be harder to pull off than the others. Personally, I found that the XP54 with Cloak, Glitch Grenade, Stun Gun, and Breach Charge was the most reliable loadout for me and my playstyle, as it allows me to make as many outplays as possible while still being able to rely on my equipment to work the way I want. But I can see other loadouts being just as viable, if used in their respective proper ways. Hell, there were even rounds where I was basically trolling with a grapple sniper and 3 nades and still managed to get really far despite us playing triple light. Speaking of the cloak, I quickly picked up that mediums that use recon senses are really blind. As you might know, when a medium uses recon senses, they actually don't have invisible enemies outlined if there's no cover in between the medium and his target. Because of this, in addition to mediums usually looking out for the enemy outlines rather than invisible lights that might be in front of them, more often than not, you can run up towards them in the open and catch them completely off guard, even if they were looking your way, at the very least, unless any piece of cover gets between you. Another great thing that I realized is that light, like anyone else, can use their ability right after being revived. As such, if you are running, say, the cloak, you should always hit the cloak the second your teammate revives you. Upon hearing the revive go off, the enemies might even peek out looking for a free kill, but if they only see your teammates, they end up getting nothing out of it. This also kind of applies to dash or grapple, but it's just not as strong as with cloak. Another thing about cloak especially is don't underestimate the power of standing still. Standing completely still turns you completely invisible and will throw off any enemy that isn't already keeping track of you. I very often would pause, cloak, and reload my guns in the middle of a fight while assessing the situation before seeing an opening and then going for a plan. You'd be surprised how much enemies will lose track of you if you just disappear for a few seconds, and how often they'll be caught off guard of you appearing out of nowhere. In the same vein, remember that the invis has a really long duration, but do keep an eye on it in the bottom right if you're using any ready place, because if you don't, it might run out and reveal you at the worst timing possible. As I mentioned before, focusing on staying alive is almost always the play, and I found that this especially rang true when it came to defending the point. As soon as there were 30 or less seconds left on the point, especially if one or both my teammates were dead, the goal was no longer killing the other teams to deny them the point. It instead basically boiled down to not letting them steal the cash out. Initially, I figured I could just keep hiding and jump down to taser whoever was stealing it in the final moment, but most of the time, the enemy teams would just kill me and steal the cash out instead. So what I started to do was trying to find a clear angle of the cash out, usually through a ceiling or wall which I had blown open with a breach charge, and then going for a headshot beam on whoever was going for a steal. It always helped to throw 1 or 2 glitches down as well. This not only got them off of the cash out, but forced the enemy to burn resources, bringing them back up. Usually I'd only get to do this once, after which I'd be forced to either try sniping them with the stun gun, or more likely I had to dive in and get a stun in the middle of the enemy team as they're going for it, as they were stealing. That being said, this song and dance would usually be exactly what we needed to secure the cash out and move on to the next round. Another thing I started picking up towards the end of the grind was using barrels that you can find across the map. Generally speaking, I would use the red barrels for opening damage. I'd run around with a red barrel, and if I managed to hit a snipe or get a direct hit with it, it would deal up to 1 and 50 damage, which one-shots lights or gets mediums, really low, and at the very least it would tickle the heavy a little bit. After that, I could just follow it up with some shots to clean them up. But it didn't stop with red barrels. Goo was a great way to break line of sight or hold enemies back that were chasing me, and if done right, I could even throw it in a way where they would get stuck and turn into free kills. The green barrels could be thrown onto enemies for additional damage, or at the very least to create a gas cloud which cut their line of sight to me, while still giving me their health bars through the gas as I dealt damage to them, with the gas, which let me continue beaming them through that very gas. And the smoke canister could just be used to cut line of sight or hide inside of the smoke, or just shake off a pesky medium who was trying to find me with recon, seeing as the smoke cuts that off. And even if I wasn't using the barrels proactively, being aware of them unlocked so many more ways that I could outplay the enemy teams, and quickly grabbing a barrel and throwing it at an enemy or shooting it when they were close enough allowed me to do so much more than I would with my normal toolkit. In general, playing off high ground seemed to be the most reliable strat, especially when combined with my favorite strat that I like to call ice fishing, where you blow a hole in the ceiling and shoot down onto unsuspecting enemies. Ice fishing was one of the few ways I could have a good idea of what the enemy team was doing, as well as a way to line up proper glitch grenades that would affect one enemy or maybe even the entire enemy team. Most of the time, a full 3-man glitch would be enough to win us the fight. I also found that while glitch grenades are great, the long fuse time makes it pretty easy for the enemy to get out of the way whenever you throw it right at them. As such, I made it a habit to either bounce it against a wall when throwing it towards an enemy, or at the very least bouncing or rolling them off of the floor when tossing a glitch grenade down onto enemies whenever I was going for some ice fishing. Another thing I learned is that nukes that already are super annoying to deal with to begin with, and they are nearly impossible to deal with as a light. The best way to deal with nukes when I wasn't expecting it was by keeping a taser on hand for the heavy and then playing sort of a game of chicken, where I would either tase them before they nuked or right after they threw the nuke out of their hands, and if done well, the barrel would spin off and they wouldn't be able to, detonate it and get a free kill. Ideally, I would have paid close attention to the enemy team as they approach and either seen the nuke or heard the C4 beeping to know that it's on the way. Because if you know that the nuke is coming, you can also completely neutralize the nuke with a well-placed glitch or preemptive stun gun. That being said, it's really hard to pull this off, and even though there were ways to deny the nuke, most of the time I would just die. Whenever I run into certain enemies with weapons that I couldn't beat even if I stunned them, I started making a habit of keeping a distance from them before even attempting a stun. If I couldn't get a stun off, I tried getting out of the way completely. Generally speaking, staying 12 or so meters away from your stun target will let you win a trade against them, but if they're playing something like an auto shotgun or the flamethrower, they basically become free kills at that range. They just cannot reach you with any meaningful damage. That being said, when I run into enemies that are running grenade launchers, either heavies or mediums, mediums, whether I stun them or not, they would still deal a lot of damage just by shooting the floor. As such, I started jumping when fighting them. If you can time the jump so you jump whenever they are about to shoot, they will have a very hard time hitting you, and if they're hitting the floor, it will minimize the amount of splash damage they actually get on you. If they are stunned at this point, they generally won't be able to fight back at all. As for positioning, just finding any weird spot helped me more often than not. There's plenty of weird climbable boxes and whatnot that only light can reach and fit into, and that the enemy rarely if ever expects you to actually use. Like these electrical boxes you can find all over Las Vegas, where you fit between the box and the ceiling. Keep in mind, in some cases you aren't able to climb up right on top of them, so you need to shoot a small obstacle at the top of the ceiling to clear the area first. Another positioning related thing I realized is that since light generally wants to play away from their team, at least slightly so on an off angle, don't make the mistake of listening to the average player or teammates that are whining that you aren't playing with your team. If a light player does stay by their teammates, more often than not, they're just gonna die and do nothing, since as I established earlier in this video, there's just not enough of a health pool for a light to do a proper trade. If you're gonna stay with your team, play medium or play a heavy instead. A productive tip from this whole positioning spiel is that if you are playing an off angle, which you probably should, and one of your teammates gets killed near you and you want to be able to revive them, you could pick up their statue and toss it to your other teammate instead, after which they can revive your teammates instead. More often than not, your other teammates will be in less of a compromised position. They might have shields, defibs, or other defensive utility, or at the very least, their revive will bait the enemy team to push your teammate instead and give you a free angle to deal a lot of damage on them as they push up. At the end of the day, the real lesson that I learned from this whole grind is that you should never, ever play light in a ranked setting. And if any of my teammates start running light, I already know that the game's going to be lost. I didn't really need to spend over 180 hours to learn what I already knew, but oh well.